I recognise some faces here, so some of you are gluttons for punishment, but it's very, very nice to see you. As I have said in the other talks I've done, there'll be a little bit of overlap, but not much. But if you may have seen me say this, what I'm about to say now, before, but I promise you we'll move on to stuff that you are unlikely to have seen in a minute. So what I wanted to say was, that was better, doesn't it? Was a quick little introduction about how we think students get words and structures and phrases. How do students get the language? And then more to the point, how do they remember the language? Can anyone who's been to one of my sessions before remember what we said about that? And which is a silly question to ask, because you probably can't remember anything. Yes, please. Yes!
If they found them very plastic, and will they remember the word cuddle?
Thank you very much. Now, the cuddle sheet, that's exactly the story I told, and I'll tell it again. One of the ways that students get and remember words is if they meet them in a kind of warm and cuddly way, in an emotional way. If there's some kind of affective engagement. In other words, if students are feeling happy and warm and open to new words and new language, they will receive it with more enthusiasm than if they're closed off. Okay, that's very obvious, isn't it? But the story that you remember is the story I told of this word. I went to a class of students and I said, can you tell me a word you've learnt recently? And they all came up with the word cuddle. And cuddle is the kind of word that I don't know. Have you ever used cuddle in a class? I'm talking about the word, by the way. And the answer is probably not. Because it's not the word that comes up that often. Yet these students, it had turned up in the class and they all remembered this word. Why did they remember it? Well, most of the reasons they gave. One was because they liked what it meant. Cuddles are one of the most beautiful words in the English language. It's lovely physical intimacy without any of the risky, messy stuff. It's just really nice, you know. But it is, isn't it? And you cuddle, parents cuddle their children. My children had cuddly animals. You've heard me say this before. When my girls were little, they had cuddly animals. They had a koala bear and a raccoon, and they'd go to sleep. You know, you go past your daughter's bedroom and you look in and they're asleep with this happy, sleepy face and they're cuddling sounds. One of the most beautiful sights in the world, you know. And so this word cuddle, they liked what it meant. They liked what it sounded like. Because cuddle, it's kind of a nice sound, cuddle. And they also liked, some of them liked how it was spelled. And so it seemed to me that that was a really good metaphor in many ways. For if we can get students to cuddle words, if you see what I mean, then they're probably going to remember them better than if these are words that they just kind of meet rather blank and cold and empty. It reminds me a little bit of, many of us have spent our time, in my case, when he first started writing, pondering over the work of Steve Krashen and worrying about the nature and the role of comprehensible input and whether or not comprehensible input is enough. You know what I'm talking about, right? And if you don't, well, it's too late. But he's, at the moment, what he's talking about is he's kind of added another adjective to this word input, and it's this: it's compelling input. And the argument is that if what you read and hear is compelling enough, in other words, involving enough, if it's dramatic enough, if it really gets you here and here, then you're much more likely to remember it than if it's kind of blurred. So one of the ways that students get and remember words is through this affective engagement. Any other ways you can think of it? Oh, and by the way, you're much more likely to remember cuddle because it's hit you in the heart. Now, if you just meet the word once and it hits you in the heart, and that's the only time you ever meet it, you'll probably remember it for a bit, and then it'll disappear in the end, because they do. So what do you need more than just affective engagement? What else do you need? Context, maybe, yes, please. A repetitive exposure, repetition of encounter. We need, if students are going to learn things, they need to see them again and again and again and again. But what we know is that just repeating something 11 times and then not again doesn't work. Repetition of encounter means that you see this thing and then maybe you see it again next week and then maybe 2 weeks later and then maybe 3 weeks later. Repetition of encounter has to be spaced. But students need that repetition of encounter. Anything else you can think of?
Connection.
Connection. And what do you mean? With their personal background, connection with them. And that's part of the effective engagement we've talked about. I completely agree. Anything else? Well, I've
Soothingness, if the words are soothing.
I think that's really soothingness.
Yeah.
I love that. I would put that in my little effective engagement bubble, but I entirely understand. They make you feel good. And if language learning can make you feel good, we've got a chance. Whereas if it makes you feel alienated or not good, we haven't got a chance. We know absolutely beyond any doubt that if students have to use their brains when they're learning, if they're cognitively engaged, they're much more likely to remember something than if they're just kind of, okay, if the teacher just says, here's the language, they're much less likely to remember it than if they have to put in some effort, some cognitive engagement. We think that if students, as you said before, if students have repetition of encounter with words, they're much more likely to remember them than if they just meet them once or twice. And all of us have this experience, because everyone in this room speaks at least one second language. And all of us have the experience that if you get to not use your second language for quite a long time, gradually bits of it start to drop off. And you go searching in your brain and you can't find them anymore. What is the word for the wing of a car in Mexican Spanish? And that's a word I used to use all the time, because every time I took my car to the taller, you do that. And now I have to really fight to try and, what is it, salpicadero or something like that. But I have to really fight to remember it, because I never use it anymore. I haven't encountered it for years, We know that students will remember language much better if they are forced to go and retrieve it and use it. Let me explain, and forgive me that this is a bit repetitious. I've got the English language is such a nightmare. But the point of retrieval and use is that if students just have cognitive engagement, affective engagement, all this kind of stuff, and they meet words, that's fine. But what we know is that when they're forced to try and find the words that are bubbling away at the bottom of their brain and dig them out and use them, the process of making the sort of synapsial connections and getting it all out is part of the process of learning, because learning is a process. And so that retrieval and use is absolutely vital. And forgive me if you've heard me say this before, but the metaphor I like to use is not so much bubbling away at the bottom of the brain. It's like when you go to find the treasure on the desert island and you get a spade and you have to dig down and dig out the treasure from under the sand. And that's what, for me, retrieval is. You're digging up the language you need and then using it. And that using it may not be, the value of it may not be that you're doing speaking practice. The value may be much more that you're doing the retrieving and the digging up and the making the connections between what you've learned before. And just to, this is the one we started with, which you remember well, and thank you for that, because that's the whole issue of cuddling and the issue of compelling input. I've stolen that term from Steve Krashen, but then many of you have spent lots of time stealing things from Steve Krashen. So right, now the question then is, if that's the case, and you're using course materials, how can you bring this kind of thing into course materials? How can you do it? Now this is an exhibitor session, and so I'm talking, I've co-written part of a series called Jetstream, which is a course book, and so I'm going to show you examples from that now to try and make these points. But whether you're interested in the course book or not, I hope you'll find that what we have to say is of general interest about the process of students getting and remembering words. So let's go. So Do you like to watch videos online? Have you ever made your own video? And a third question, have you ever uploaded a video onto an internet site? Very quickly, would you quickly answer those questions, talk to each other? Did anyone tell you that they've uploaded a video?
Yes.
Okay, what did they tell you?
They upload videos.
That's amazing. Did you get to find out what it was about?
No, then we just started asking.
So it's about introducing each other, that kind of thing. So what was the video about that you uploaded?
It was actually a teaching tip for ESL teachers.
And where did you upload it to?
YouTube.
YouTube. And how many, lots of people watched it?
I don't know the exact number, but
Because we're rather obsessed, aren't we? If you upload a video, you say, it's only more people today, more people today. It's like a Facebook post. How many people have liked my Facebook post? Oh no, only 23. Oh no, no. Okay, so anybody else uploaded a video? Yes, tell me about it.
It was just an introduction. I was teaching a TESOL grammar class, and I was just introducing myself, and the purpose of it was to encourage that they could do it too. They could become a grammar teacher too.
Magic. Isn't it extraordinary that when I started teaching in about 1923, the idea of making a video of any description was absolutely impossible. You'd have to have hired a film crew, and they would come with cameras this size, and then when they finished it, they'd end up with tape. You ever see that videotape from the early days? Most of you are too young, but it used to be about this big, and you'd thread it through the gates, and then it would break and crinkle and stuff. So in the school I worked in those days, in the south of England, we had special video lessons when you would take the class into a room where there was a television screen, and you know, you'd have prepared this about 2 days in advance. But now, of course, I just videoed an interview with my friend Scott Thornbury this morning, and I'm going to post it to my students this afternoon. And even I can do that. You know, anybody can do it. Now, why did I say you first? Well, I say you first because any teacher right now working with students, it's the students who matter, and they're the ones who walk into the room with you, and the lesson is all about them. It's not about me at all. It's all about them. So what a good course book should say to students is, you first, before we get on to anything that's on the page, or in brackets, anything that I, the teacher, have planned for you, I need you to be in the room first. I need you to be here because, you know, you bought this, you bought the watch you're wearing, you bought your water, you bought the convention program, but the thing you bought which is most important is you. And what you've done, what you have to say, what you have to contribute to the class is 100% the most important thing in the whole room. And so the first thing we do before we get on to what we're going to talk about now is get you to talk about, and I haven't done it properly because the group's too big and this is a different kind of event, this isn't a lesson. But I'm going to get you to talk about it. And the moment you talk about it, me, the teacher, has linguistic material to work with. I can pick up an interesting phrase she said, or I can help him with maybe he said something and I can help him to say it better. Or we can pick up on the video that she made and talk about it, and we can start talking about it. We've got some amazing material right in front of us. And that's where we start. That's where you have to start. Because if you walk in and if you walk into a classroom and start talking at people, a little bit like I'm doing now, that's not a lesson. It's something else. I mean, this isn't a lesson, this is a talk. But in a lesson, it's what the students have, bring and do that is the beginning, the middle and the end of everything. So that's what you have to start with all the time. Now that we're ready for it, and of course with a real class, we would have talked seriously about what you had to say, worked on the language, maybe helped you with some extra language. If you didn't know how to say well, I'll help you how to say and now we can move on to this. So it says there, you can see, it says, guess, look at the photo. Who do you think Bing is and what does he do? Any ideas? I hope you can't read it.
He's a video blogger.
He's a video blogger?
Yeah.
Why do you think that?
It says blog media.
It says blog media superstar. So he's probably a vlogger. Well, he is a vlogger, as it happens. And the story is, he's the son of a good friend of mine, and he has about 584,000 followers on his YouTube channel. And when he was a kid, I'm telling you what's in the text more or less, when he was a teenager, 15, 16 or something like that, you know, he was just one of the most famous people around. He was with his family on holiday in Sweden, and some girl came running up and said, "You're Bing!" Ah! You know, because she watched his videos, and all the people who were his followers were, most of them were girls, and they were about 3 or 4 years younger than him. And he became an absolute sensation. And over a 2-year period, he did this incredible thing. He did something called Past and Future Bing. So in the first year, this is for a 16-year-old, it's so amazing. Maybe he was 17 by now. So amazing. In the first year, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, whatever, you know, every other day, he would video a little thing just talking about himself and his life. Because that's what most vloggers do. They just talk about themselves. It's incredibly self-referential. You know, I'm feeling a bit rubbish today because, you know, well, I'm in Baltimore and I stayed up too late last night and I've got a bit of jet lag and all this kind of thing. That's what they talk about. And then the next year, what he did is, so every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, he spoke to the video that he'd made the year before. So he was commenting himself on what he'd made on that day the year before, or the day before. You get the idea. I don't know if I'm explaining it. And it was really, really cool, you know? It's really amazing. It's such a cool thing to do. But of course, 585,000 followers, is that a lot of people? No, not in the present day world of vlogging. In the present day world of vlogging, by the way, in the present day world of vlogging, the girl in this picture, there's the girl in the picture, is called Zoe, Zoella, and she's got at the moment 16.5 million followers. So that's quite a few followers, and some of the American bloggers have numbers which are significantly in excess of that. People who are actually devoted to them and who watch them, and some people have predicted the end of film because of vlogging and stuff like that. But everything moves in cycles, and we'll see, because I bet you vlogging will become a little bit sort of passé fairly soon. So what do you do with a reading text like this? Well, of course, you find tricks to make students read it again, so that hopefully the input will be, remember that word, compelling. Because if the input is compelling, they might remember what's going on. So you have to look at the numbers, 47,000, 154,000, 6.6 million, or whatever it is. And they have to find the numbers and work out what it is. But then something that really, really matters is you get students to close anything they've got. And then they have to talk to each other and remember. How much can you remember? How much can you remember about Bing, Christopher Bing? How much can you remember? And when the students are trying to remember, by the way, memory is one of the keys to successful language learning, memory. Good language learners have good memories, or they develop their memories. Good language learners remember stuff. That's how you learn a language, remembering how to say this, remembering how to say that. And any of you who are about as ancient as me will know about one of the best books ever written about the learning of languages, by Earl Stevick, called, oh, there is no one as old as me, a book called Memory, Meaning and Method, which is one of the classic books written about English language learning. Memory, Meaning and Method, Earl Stevick. I think it might have been Newbury House, and it was published in about 1983 or something like that. And what is the first of those? Memory. Because memory matters. So what we've done in our book, I forget the book for a minute, one of the things that we do with students is you get them to try and remember. If they've read a story, then you get them to tell the story again, and again, and again, and again. And each time they tell the story, they remember bits of it. They become more sophisticated about the way they talk about it. They use better language. They find themselves more comfortable with the language they're trying to use. That's why when students hear a story, for example, one of the stories we tell is a true story of a girl from Colorado Springs called Jessica Brunsma. Have you ever heard of Jessica Brunsma? She was a 24-year-old girl from Colorado Springs, and she went to Germany, and she stayed with the aunt of a friend of hers in Bavaria, which is part of Germany. And one day she went walking in the mountains. Beautiful day. But then the fog came down. And she got lost, completely lost. So lost that when there was no more fog anymore, she had no idea where she was. She was completely, you'd say in Spanish, desubicada. She had no idea where she was. She didn't know where, you know, and so she, and then she realized that she'd left without any water, no cell phone, silly girl, nothing. She just had the clothes she was wearing, sort of training pants and you know, not even a jacket, just, you know, because it had been a lovely day when she went out walking. And after about 24 hours, she saw helicopters, and it was clear they were looking for her, but they were way over there. They were looking in the wrong place because she hadn't properly told everyone where she was going. And then suddenly she fell, slammed into some rocks, broke her collarbone, smashed her ribs, fractured her ankle, and stuff like that. And now she's in real shock. This is a true story. You can Google it. We'll talk about that in a minute. And she didn't have any water. But then she climbed into a cave as night came. She managed to climb into a cave. She's in terrible pain, this girl, you know. And then the next morning she managed to crawl down to a little place where there was a little stream to get some water. And then she climbed back to the cave. And she began to think this was it, you know. Because if no one came for a few days, you know, it's all bones broken. She was in a mess, no? But in front of the cave, there was a steel cable lying on the ground, and then a bit over there was some metal posts with cable, you know, taut cable. And anyway, so 2-3 days passed, and you know, she thought, bloody hell, you know, I've had it. And then suddenly, the cable on the ground started to move. And this girl just has to be some kind of a genius, 24-year-old, has to be some kind of a genius, because without hardly a thought and in terrible pain, she ripped off her top, took off her bra, tied her bra to the cable, and the cable went into the air, off went her bra. And that was that. And the extraordinary thing about this story is that cable was a system for taking logs when they cut down trees up and down the mountain. They weren't using it, because they didn't do logging at this time of year. But that day, the engineer went to service the cable. So he tried it out. And he was sitting there, and the cable was going, and he suddenly went, bloody hell, what's that? as this woman's bra suddenly turned up in front of him. And luckily, he'd heard this thing on the radio about the girl who'd been lost in the mountains, and so he was able to put 2 and 2 together, and then he rang the authorities, and then the helicopters knew what to do because they just followed the line of the cable until they found her, and she was saved. That's the story, right? It's not a story. I promise you, it's a true story. Now, the point is, you can Google it. And something that course books need to do in 2016 is tell truth, not lies. In 1985, when I wrote my first course book, you could have everything within the covers of the course book, and if it was true or not true, it didn't matter, because the students are never going to find out. Unless they, you know, because it was much more difficult. But in 2016, you tell them this story, and I say it's a true story. If you want, you can Google it right now, and you will find her story. But if you were to Google it right now, and you couldn't find it, and it turned out it was a wrong story, you wouldn't trust me anymore. Anyway, it's a true story. Why am I telling? Oh yes, now the point about this story is, I think it's compelling. I don't know how you feel, it's quite compelling, isn't it? It's quite an interesting story. So what? So I'm going to get you to tell the story again, to retell the story, to tell it again. Maybe I'll get you to tell it from her point of view. Maybe I'll get you to tell the story from the point of view of someone who lived in the area. Maybe I'll get you to tell the story from the point of view of a helicopter pilot. Maybe I'll get you to tell the story from the engineer who saw this thing coming up on the cable. Maybe we'll have a press conference. And you're Jessica, and you're Jessica's family in Colorado Springs, and every time we retell the story, we activate students' memory, students remember things better, they perfect what they're trying to say better, they have to work on what they're trying to say so it works better, and what we do is we trick them by getting them to tell the story again and again and again, because memory really matters. Okay, and as I said to you, what we say to our students is, go and have a look. This is all about you, so go and have a look. If this story is interested you, go and have a look at it. Because you can. Right now in class, I mean, I would say do it now, but right now just get your phones out if you're connected to the network, and go and look and find out more. So, for example, this girl, Zoella, did you see that? The girl there in the picture has these millions and millions of followers. She's terribly well known all over the world. I have a friend in Recife, in northeastern Brazil. Her daughter is devoted to this girl. And this girl wrote a novel called Girl Online. And I say to my students, go on, Google her. There was a controversy about the novel. Find out what the controversy was. And I'll leave that to you for homework, right? But this is a true story. And the moment it's a true story, it works for students. Because guess what? Learning a language is kind of boring. Our students aren't linguists. They don't want to be linguists. They don't want to know how language works. They just want to be able to use it. So we've got to find content to provoke them to use it. Cuddly content. Content which excites them, which engages them. And so by getting them to actually explore online and find real content, well, what we're saying to them is that this language isn't just the present perfect. It's not just the present continuous. This is a living language which we use to communicate ideas and stuff like that. Now, look at this. This is how the text ends. I like you, not 16, 6.16. And although we can't really do it because I haven't given you enough prep time for this, of the ideas, but the fact is when Chris and his friends started doing this at the beginning of the YouTube boom, because he started blogging just when YouTube started, when he started doing it, they did it for fun. And they all helped each other, and they all helped each other make films, and it was really good fun, and they did it like a great big amateur, look, we're changing the world. But now Zoe is sponsored to the tune of millions of dollars by the beauty industry. It's changed everything. And what I'd like my students to do is to talk about that. What do you think? The word being think, because cognitive engagement really matters as well as effective engagement. And when I get our students to think, you've heard me say this before, it's the most important thing students ever do in a class, think. All over this TESOL conference, you'll have heard people mention the term critical thinking, getting students to think critically. But actually the most important kind of thinking students ever do in a class is this. Do you think that the use of money and the way that money has come into the whole thing of blogging has ruined it, or is going to ruin it, or not? What I'm doing now is the most interesting thing I've done in the whole of this presentation, and I'm not doing it enough, which is just to shut up and let the students think about what they want to say. Because when students think about what they want to say, they get the best language practice they ever get in a lesson. And yet, as you know this perfectly well, especially people in this room who observe teachers, you know when you observe a teacher? And the teacher, and they can see you, you're in the back of the class with your notepad. And they ask a question to the students, what do you think about Zoella and her blog on the beauty industry? But I'm being observed. And so the one thing I can't stand is silence. Absolutely terrifies me. So what teachers tend to do is, what do you think about Zoella and her blogging in the beauty industry? I mean, do you think it's a good thing? I mean, do you think money's ruining it? Or have you ever seen a teacher do that? Have you ever done that? Yeah. On a bad day? We all do it. And I've just denied him the best opportunity I could possibly have given him in this lesson, which is to say, what do you think about Zoella being a vlogger, being completely paid for by the beauty industry? Does it in any way make her a worse blogger than Bing? What do you think? And now, I don't know, you probably aren't thinking at all, but now he's thinking, and he's sort of thinking in English, and he knows I want him to say something, but because I'm giving him time to think, we're doing well. So that's the simple thing. And of course, when you have a text like this, you use it for grammar, you use it for there's used to and would and all the kind of grammar things. And grammar is important. Students need to learn grammar, but it's not that important. Or rather, we spend too much time teaching grammar. Because if you learn the present perfect for 2 weeks, there is no guarantee that you will learn the present perfect better having studied it for 2 weeks than if you come across it from time to time and work with it a little bit and then do something else. Is that a controversial statement? I don't know. But in 45 minutes, there's not enough time to really explore that. But it's, I feel passionately that an example that you've heard me say before, some of you, one of the best lessons I've ever heard is a little audio tape of 2 7-year-old boys in Madrid. And they've been working with how sound works. And so they've been using microphones in a little computer program, and they see these sound waves. And on the audio, you hear a little boy of 7 saying, "Sound is made when an object vibrates." To me, that's complete magic. Has that boy spent 2 weeks learning the passive? No. Does he know what the passive is? Probably not. But he's so keen to pass on the knowledge he's got, compelling knowledge he's got, because he's learnt how sound works and he's seen the sound waves, that he actually says sound is made when an object vibrates. Isn't that fantastic? It's really good language. But the teacher hasn't spent 2 weeks teaching him the passive. The teacher has allowed him to come up with the language, just enough language that he needs to say what he wants to say. I'm getting slightly off the point. The point I'm making is, of course, you get students to study grammar. But we probably don't need to spend as much time studying grammar as some of us have done in the past. That's what I think. So here's the thing about numbers and how you say it. And you probably can't see this, but here's a little activity. You said, somebody said at the back this thing about students. You said about students' lives, right? About their feelings, right? This is an activity you can't see, but it says, I'd like you to put down the percentages that you believe to be true of people. And here's the percentage. What percentage of all lost TV? What percentage of all lost TV remotes are found in the fridge? What percentage of the food eaten in the world is fast food? What percentage of all American men are 6 feet or taller? What percentage of all pet owners allow their pets on the bed? What percentage of all the phone calls in the world are in English? What percentage of the population in your country owns a car? What percentage of the population in your country has a passport? Now what you do is you get students, it's mildly interesting statistics, no? At least for a few minutes. I mean, what percentage of Americans have passports, for example?
10% or something like that.
So what you do is you get students to think about it. Remember, I'm making him think again, I'm making him work. You get students to think about it, and then they have to put down a percentage. And then they have to compare it with other people and see if they agree. And when that's all over, you know what? What can you do? You Google it. In class, you Google it. Why? Because suddenly English is about something. And because you've had to choose what percentage of people do this, what percentage of people do that, and then you compare it with him, it's quite interesting to know whether she has the same kind of thoughts about it as you do. She says that, you know, I don't know, 5% of all lost TV remotes are found in the fridge, and he says 25%. It's not that interesting, but it's interesting enough to talk about just for a little bit. And because it's compelling enough, we've got them. And it's possible that this will be more memorable than any grammar lesson of the same kind. Don't want that, I'm not interested in that. I've said before, the first question I asked you, since we're talking about videos, is how many of you have uploaded a video online? She's done the one about teaching tips, you did the one about...
Just introducing,
encouraging people to be able to teach grammar. By the way, let me be quite clear, I am not against teaching grammar. Because you have to teach grammar, because if students can't, if language users can't manipulate the grammatical system carefully, they can't ever be unambiguous. Because when you can't exactly use the right grammar, people don't quite know what you're talking about. And when you can, they do. But well, I've said it before, it's the amount of time we spend on it that scares me. But so people upload videos. You know the people who should be uploading videos? It's the students uploading videos in English. Anyone can do it. It's dead easy. I can make a video this second. You can make a video this second. And you go straight out of this room, and provided this wretched free BCC Wi-Fi is working, which for those of you who are not from the US and so don't have 3G on your phone, well, you can upload it on YouTube today. It'll take you, 5 minutes after this talk, it'll be on YouTube. What we know is that when students perform in English with the expectation that other people will see or hear them, they do it with more care and more interest and a greater attention to detail than any other time. There's a friend of mine called Vicky Salmel, and she teaches in a government secondary school in Buenos Aires in Argentina. And she makes this point. She gets her teenagers to make videos using pictures from the old masters, using this, making little video logs and things like that. And she says, her students... I'm just going to levitate. What she says, sorry, I'm just kidding. What she says, these kids who are pretty careless in class when they talk, but the moment they have to put one of these videos online, they're much more careful with their language. Right, what were we talking about? So getting students to make videos of themselves and upload them, it really, really matters. And it's both affective, it's cognitively engaging, it gives them that rehearsal and use we were talking about, and so on. This is just a little example of something else that I wanted to mention, and then I'll make a few little concluding remarks, and you see how you feel. This is a little dialogue, a made-up dialogue. It's a fake. It's not true. It's artificial, but hopefully it's quite funny, and I'll just explain it to you. So there are a couple of people working in a restaurant. Have you ever worked in a restaurant? Hands up if you've worked in a restaurant. See, this is amazing. Most of us have it in our background somewhere. What's it like?
Busy.
Busy?
Difficult.
Difficult? Why is it difficult?
Long hours, always on your feet.
Yeah, and by the end of it, your
customers.
legs are just completely killing you, yeah? Anybody else? What's it like? It's interactive. If you're lucky, you meet nice people and you chat.
Then you get in trouble with being
You get in trouble for what?
You get in trouble with being
Yes, if you interact too much. Stop it, you're not supposed to be talking to the customers, you're supposed to be... Yeah, and so on and so on. This is it, remember, you first. A lot of students in your class, I bet, have worked in a restaurant or have something to say about working in a restaurant. Okay, some of them haven't. We make that judgment all the time. But it's something we talk about. So the students listen to a dialogue about two people working in a restaurant, and one of them gets a call. And of course, they're both out of work actors. Well, they're not out of work because they're working in a restaurant, so they're in work. But they both want to be actors. They want to be film actors. And one of them gets a call on his cell phone, and it's a Hollywood casting director. And she says, "Oh, please, sorry about this." And Melanie Ford, the woman who rings him up and says, "We want you for the part." And he's talking to his waitress friend, or his waiter friend, and he's on his cell phone, and he says, "They want me for the part." And so we have this long conversation about they want me for the part, they want me to do this, they want me to do that. And at the end of the conversation, he turns to the man and he says, "You know what?" With the words that most restaurant workers have on one, "You know what? I quit." And off he walks. 2 weeks later, he meets his waitress friend. And guess what? It never happened. So what happened when it never happened is he's moaning to her, he's upset and he's lost his job and he has to find another job, and he says, he's complaining, he's moaning, he says, "She said she wanted me for the part. She said I was going to get a big role. She said, and of course, what are we doing? We're teaching them how when you report what people say, you can either do it as a kind of simultaneous thing. She says she wants me for the part. She said, or if we're talking about a conversation that took place sometime later, we shift the whole thing into the past. It's a grammatical reality. It's worth teaching. But in that conversation, there are other language points that are worth it as well. I call that suitcase language. Suitcase language is language that comes up in a text or a conversation that you're not going to spend your whole life teaching, but which is so interesting and exotic that maybe students will pick it up and put it in their suitcase and take it away.
Yep.
And maybe, like cuddle, maybe that's the kind of language that will appeal to them. So in this conversation that I've just described to you, we've got things like, isn't there anything, well, so for example, if you look at number 3, you have to match it. It says, you could look pleased to see me. You could look pleased to see me. When have you ever taught that? You don't teach that, but it's a wonderful expression to use. And if you're lucky, some students, not all, but 1 or 2 students in the class will go, wow, you know, and they'll take it away, put it in the suitcase, say, hey, come on, you could look pleased to see me. You've said that before, haven't you, to people? Sometimes, no, you haven't, because they always look pleased to see you. And here's a little phrase they have to match. What's got into you? What's got into you? What's got into you? I'm not going to teach a whole lesson with teaching you how to say, what's got into you? What has got into you? What has got into you? Repeat, what has got into you? But this is language that comes up. It's interesting. It's worth putting in your suitcase and taking away for possible use. And so a big issue for us is what we call suitcase language. We could talk about film and movies, but I sense the power of the clock. But very interestingly, it says, guess, what do you think makes The Return of the King unique and special? The Return of the King is a movie, by the way. It is unique. Anybody know why? Well, Google it. I'm being quite serious, because with my students, now we're all grown-ups. This is English we're doing. And we're talking about films. So you go and get the English. Get involved. It's your language. Google it. In class, it's only going to take about 2 or 3 minutes. Anyone found it yet? Go on, Google. Is anybody Googling it? It's your homework. But seriously, in my class, I would get students to look for it. And they're probably going to have to look for it in English. It may be there in Indonesian, I don't know, but probably not. It's probably there in English because it's all about Hollywood and stuff like that. Google it, find out. The answer? Anyone know the answer?
Most Academy Awards.
Close. He said it won the most Academy Awards. Close. It's something to do with that. Anybody got any ideas?
The most money.
No. It's to do with Academy Awards.
What's 7?
11.
What?
11.
11, yes, it won 11 Academy Awards, but I think some other films have won 11. But it's,
It won all the awards and it was nominated for.
have you just found that? You see, and suddenly, yes, we're doing an English lesson, but it's not the most interesting thing you've ever heard, but it's sort of a little bit interesting. It's the only movie ever that has won all the awards for which it was nominated. Is that interesting?
Yes.
A little bit. I mean, to be honest, I don't care, but just okay, enough. I don't really, it's time to stop. What I've tried to describe in a rather rambling way is some of the procedures that this course Jetstream that I've been involved in tries to flag up as things we believe that students should be doing, and maybe that teachers should be encouraged to do with their students. So what do they look like? Well, the first thing is what we call you first, and I've described that in detail. The students bring themselves into the room. They're the beginning and the middle and the end of everything. And so if we can bring from them everything we need to do, we're doing well. We have moments called Everybody Up, where if you can, it depends on the classroom you've got, but if you can, getting students up into the middle of the room, talking to each other about real things, which is precisely what you were talking about. Talking about real things, not just sitting in rows, but getting up and talking to each other, really has an impact. And it makes them rehearse, retrieve, and use the language they've got. And everything they say is food for us to not food, what's the word? Grist to our mill. Does that, you know what I mean? It's raw material for us to mould and work with and so on like that. We're absolutely convinced that when students are cognitively engaged, they remember better than if they're a little bit dead. A little, you know what I mean, a little bit kind of. Look, on the whole, teaching deaf students has never worked for me, but seriously, if students are cognitively engaged, if their brains are working, so we have things called guess. This isn't rocket science. People, this is nothing particularly new about this, but what we want to do is label all these things, label them so they're like a kind of great big flag-waving sign to people. Guess. When you guess, you use your brain, and the moment you guess, and then you activate your schemata and stuff like that, but your brain's alive. We have situations where we say to students, think, and there's your thinking, there's your thinking, which is just giving students space to think. Because when you think, you get better language practice than you'll ever get with me telling you to repeat. Because you do it all in here. And you get 100% practice in here. So getting students to think and be cognitively engaged works. That little symbol there, with a cross, is all about memory. Getting students to do things from memory. To tell stories from memory. Even sometimes to recite things from memory. But using and activating their memory really works. Of course, we want students to speak in class. Because when students speak, they are retrieving and using the language, and that's one of our 4 things, do you remember? That retrieval and use really matters. So how can you do that? Well, you can do role plays. Remember I told you the story of Jessica in the mountains? Well, let's have a press conference with Jessica, her family, a reporter, the helicopter pilot, whoever it is, and they role play. And hopefully it's good fun. But what's it for? It's for something much more basic, much more pragmatic than that. It's to get students to retell what they've learned in an amusing way and from a different angle. Role play. Mini talks do the same kind of thing, where you get students as a group and you say, this is the topic, and in 20 minutes, your group has to present this topic to the rest of the class. And everyone has to take part. You've got 20 minutes to prepare. And a bit like the video, uploading a video, you're going to do it with more commitment than you ever do if I just said to you, what do you think about it? Because if everyone in the group has to take part, and your group is presenting to the rest of the class, you know this, you've seen this. Even the most cynical student gets a little bit concerned to present well to the rest of the class. You know. Okay, some of them don't, but most of them do. Most of them. Listen, every talk you've ever been to about teaching at a TESOL convention or other kind of convention, the one thing we don't really talk about are the students who absolutely refuse to take part. But that's a different conversation, and we could spend a whole talk talking about those guys. But when you do mini talks, most of the students, the ones who aren't seriously rebellious, will want to take part and do this kind of thing. And then crucially, we have a label which is exactly, to come back to you again, we call it your story, because your story is the most interesting thing you know to talk about. The most interesting thing that has ever happened to you is you. We have a program in Britain called Desert Island Discs. Have you ever heard of that? It's a fabulous program. It's a sort of 45-minute radio program. And what they do is they interview somebody, a celebrity, and they have to choose 8 records that they take to a desert island. And then in between the records, they talk about their lives, and the interviewer asks them about their lives. And sometimes it's quite interesting. If there's a public figure you know, listening to what music they like is quite good fun. And then they talk about their lives, and that's really good fun too. What's interesting about it is that at the end of the program, the interviewer says, well, thank you, John Smith, for coming to Desert Island Discs. And he always says, thank you. You know why? Because he spent 45 minutes talking about his favourite subject, you know, which is him. And so your story really matters. Our story really matters. And then finally, and then there's the suitcase language. Yes, we have to teach grammar. Yes, we have to teach vocabulary. But sound is made when an object vibrates. Suitcase language, you take it with you. Some of the language that crops up and which we ignore as our peril. Because the students don't want to ignore it. It's part of what they want to take with them. And to round it off, getting students to find out that The Return of the King is the only movie ever to have won all the Oscars for which it was nominated. Why not? Why not get them to do that? It's real. And then getting them to make videos and post them online really works. My co-author, a lovely woman called Jane Retelling, also wants to add in something called Take a Break, relaxation activities with students. And she's absolutely right. I should give you a relaxation activity, and I am about to. It's called the end. But just, I'm going to finish now, but you want to say something. So that's me done, and then you want to say something. Thank you very much. Back to you.